I remember many years ago when I was in a period of gainful unemployment, sitting in a hotel room in London, and Charles Handy was up on the screen talking about the kind of portfolio career and kind of the S kind of curve in people's careers. And this was before that notion of even a portfolio career. And I remember ringing my then kind of, boyfriend and now husband, saying, it's okay, I might be on the bottom of the S now, but it's only up from here. And I think that notion that, all of us should have the opportunity to reinvent ourselves, and at times of either opportunity or challenge. So I think in the period when we kind of come out of kind of COVID, I think learning and relearning and unlearning and learning will be really, really important.
This is something that we talk about in Aontas a lot, and we always look at lifelong learning, the holistic sense, and the broader purpose and the impact and benefits it can have to people, society, and communities. But particularly in terms of post-COVID, and I suppose we don't even know what that's going to look like. But this was two things that really come to mind when I think about this. And really, it's from my learning and experience over the last 16 months of talking to learners, talking to practitioners, and two words come up. And I suppose the first one is connection, and the need for connection, and connection between people at a community level, but also in terms of the education experience and the connection between the educator and the learner and peer learning. And I suppose what we have learned is that educators have been really ingenious in terms of their engagement with learners, and they saw that has been absolutely vitally important. So I suppose what learners have said to us over the last 15, 16 months is that learning has been a lifeline for them. So, some people have been extremely isolated, and as regardless of the different kind of supports that have been put in place, some people were just not in a position to engage. And I'll talk a little bit perhaps later around lifelong learning participation rates and the drop-off that we've seen. So that connection is really important. So in terms of lifelong learning, it's well documented that lifelong learning has really positive benefits in terms of people's mental health and well-being, bringing people out of poverty, in terms of supporting people to reach their educational aspirations.
We have to be transformative and emancipatory, and that's what we need to do when we bring people into a centre. We need to give people a voice. We're about advocacy and agency, and I'm not sure that the online world can do that the way when people come into a classroom. And I suppose that's the challenge for us, is what will we do differently now that lots of the skills we thought before could actually be learned online, and we can kind of record classes and revision. So when we bring people in, we need to work with them differently, and that's the exciting challenge that post-COVID that I look forward to.
I see lifelong learning as being a continuum, a never-ending process. There is no finish line. We here in Cambodia are grappling with many challenges in terms of adult literacy, adult education, but really I think the foundation for lifelong learning comes at primary level, and comes often before children start formal education themselves, and that's particularly challenging when you've many parents who are illiterate and you have a challenging education system. But I would see lifelong learning as being crucial to our organisation's work going forward, but also crucial that it's done at a formal level at the early years, at the primary years, number one, and number two, that we take a whole community approach to it.
The challenges with lifelong learning, and I suppose we have kind of quite a strong evidence base and statistical base on this, in that whether we want to compare ourselves to kind of European figures, traditionally, I suppose Ireland has kind of punched below its weight in relation to kind of lifelong learning. I think the most recent kind of stats, we're hovering at around, maybe 15%, and there's, targets across Europe in terms of 25%. So I think from a purely objective basis, there is a challenge in terms of either engaging more people in lifelong learning or the opportunities, because we are a bit of a laggard in terms of Europe, where ironically in relation to kind of our access rates, we've become kind of a leader in it.
In terms of the challenges, I think we know that this is a huge issue with regard to educational inequality in Ireland. It has been persistent for decades, but there is an absolute need to address this now. what we know in terms of like lifelong learning participation rates for people who leave school early, it's around 3% compared to the national level of around 12.5%. And I know we're aiming for 18% lifelong learning participation rate in 2025. Yeah, but what do all these numbers mean? And so what they mean is that people who are in education or have the most educational experience gain the most.
I think during COVID, so much of we realised we really did need to have a really high level of digital skills. And the huge challenge is that we leave nobody behind. And I think that's key to, you know, us, and particularly coming like in adult basic education and community education, is to ensure that we kind of narrow that divide, that digital divide that absolutely was there but became so apparent. And the people that were left behind were the people who didn't have a smartphone, who didn't have a laptop, who didn't have space to work in. So I think that's the big challenge is actually that we bring everybody with us.
Today in Cambodia, less than 3% of Cambodian children reach minimum learning standards. And before COVID, we had big problems in the education system, but COVID has made a fragile education system even more vulnerable here. Here in Cambodia, we've less than 3% are reaching minimum learning standards. We had 90% of teachers who were killed during the Khmer Rouge regime. And we have the majority who survived that regime are illiterate. So you got big problems with access to quality education.
I'm also very heartened to see that government is developing a well-being framework that, you know, goes beyond just the economic GDP indicator, so that we're looking at, you know, how citizens or individuals in Ireland are engaging, you know, and are supported to engage fully in their family lives, community lives, you know, and maybe subsequently the economy. So as I said, even at a European level, there's a huge amount of supports and backing for what we're doing between upskilling pathways, the European Pillar of Social Rights Charter. So, you know, the context is really supportive of that.
I think, I mean, I asked myself the question, do we want to go back to the status quo? I mean, was the status quo education system one that included everybody? I think the answer would be, in my opinion, no. So what can we learn from the experience of education during the pandemic that could support a more inclusive education system? And there are two things that come to mind. Firstly is with regard to the potential of blended learning. We've talked to learners, and many people with disabilities are the same. There's a huge benefit, and we've been advocating for this for years, of having that blended approach, you know, the in-person and that online learning. And that has huge possibilities, and also will help people in terms of offering flexibility. People have got caring responsibilities in terms of addressing issues of transport. But there is a real need to maintain that blended learning approach. We know that, you know, that in-person learning is absolutely vital, and it's not going to work for all learning, but it has a huge potential. And what some learners say, you know, I want the best of both worlds. So rather than kind of going back and returning to the status quo of what we had before, of looking at the value of blended learning, provided people's you know, have the right equipment, you know, devices, ability to engage online, and Wi-Fi.
We have all kind of realised the potential of online learning. And that absolutely, what we need to take with us from what we've learned is the blended approach, or what can enhance learning. What we learned during COVID, we need to really evaluate and look at it and think about what can enhance learning going forward. And there's huge opportunities, because it was fantastic to be with people from all different parts of Ireland learning together, and you didn't have to travel. So certainly that's an opportunity that, you know, not to be missed.
You know, Cambodia and Ireland are 10,000 kilometres apart before COVID. They're still 10,000 kilometres apart now after COVID. In some ways, to be honest, the distance between the two countries has been greater than ever, because we've had no tourists here in well over a year, and the majority of our economy is built around the tourism and garment industries. So the distance in some ways feels greater, but actually in other ways it feels less than 10,000 kilometres. I'm chatting to you today on Zoom. We're more engaged in technology than we ever were before. Half of Cambodians now own one of these, a smartphone. We still have a massive way to go to improve technological literacy, but things are more possible now. And there is an opportunity to do things at scale with technology.
It's funny, you know, through the pandemic, I engage with more people across community further in higher education. I've had more meetings than I ever would have. And I think one of the resounding things that sort of impacted me across that was how people are so passionate, how they've got huge expertise, a real understanding of education inequality and a desire to change that. I suppose that I know people have used that phrase a lot better together, but there's definitely something that really powerful in terms of collaboration within community further in higher education to address, particularly if we're addressing the challenges and the fallout of COVID, those participation rates that I talked about. We have to work together on that. And I suppose one of the things that, in terms of the lessons we've learned, is being able to leverage that expertise and perhaps look at different areas in terms of, you know, shared resources, having more collaboration around different areas, supporting learners' pathways and transitions between the different parts of the system. And that I think we do, like at the start of the pandemic, there was a real sense of a common purpose, and you know, it was all like heroic and people wanted to work collectively. And so we don't go back into our silos, that we look at how we can maintain that connection as well going forward.
I think there's also a need, and once again, you know, this is happening, but I don't think it's necessarily happening consistently across the sector, is, you know, how do we make provision for the recognition of prior learning and you know, education, so the RPL, RPEL, and you know, is there consistency kind of across that framework? Given the fact that, you know, Ireland, once again, was one of the kind of the leaders in terms of adopting the Bologna process in the NFQ, I think there probably still are opportunities for looking at more transferability across, you know, educational institutions. So that, coming back to that notion that we have portfolio careers, why can't we have portfolio educations that say, you know, you may have started a program in Cork, but you have to move to Dublin, you know, being able to kind of transfer kind of those experiences. Ireland's a relatively, you know, small country. Everybody knows everybody. We're all working, you know, to a certain extent, singing off the same hymn sheet. So trying to create more of those opportunities. And I'm heartened, you know, even in the last, you know, 18 months, that there are those kind of programs in terms of micro-credentialing, in terms of collaboration across institutions, is happening.
I think that people may not sign up for a degree course, but and I know that lots of colleges do it, it is that modular approach that you might just need a short course in cybersecurity. You might just need a short course. And I think, you know, and I think that's really important, that people can seamlessly, you know, kind of do courses, and I suppose it fits into their career path, and it enables them to also change their career path. And I think higher education has an important role there, and in supporting employers, and indeed supporting the community education sector.
Only a couple of weeks ago, I spoke to Ambassador McCullough, who's the Irish ambassador to Cambodia and Vietnam and Laos, and he spoke about the massive impact educational institutions in Ireland had made in Vietnam's story. And we want the exact same for Cambodia. We're not years behind Vietnam, to be honest, in terms of our progress. We're decades behind. But there's an opportunity for Irish higher education institutions to engage with our work. We're now an Irish charity with a footprint in Ireland. And we would love to see, as well as Ireland talking about its carbon footprint, to have a think about what our educational footprint is, and to match skilled professionals in Irish higher education institutions with skilled professionals here in Cambodia. And not only will the Cambodian professionals benefit from that, I can guarantee the Irish professionals will as well.